Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for coming to the fourth session of Parents as Partners. So ordinarily we've been in the auditorium. I hope everyone finds their way here. Today we have Mr. Michael for English, and then we have Ms. Amanda for Science, and finally Ms. Iman for Arabic A. So if your child doesn't take Arabic A, you may stay or leave at the end. It's totally up to you. So I think last week I mentioned that the curriculum handbooks were nearly ready. The grade 6 one is now ready. It's being published hopefully today or tomorrow. I will send everyone an email when they are all up. They look very good. It's been a lot of work, a lot of proofreading, but hopefully it's very informative and something that's been worth waiting for. Anyway, over to Mr. Michael for English.
Hi. It's lovely to see you all. I also hope that my presentation for you today is informative. Starting with language and literature, I thought it'd be useful to provide a quick overview of what the aims of the course are, as it kind of provides a framework for us as teachers where we drive our curriculum mapping, as well as how we approach texts and the learning experiences of your children. So in language and literature, we focus on using language as a vehicle for thought, creativity, reflection, learning, self-expression, analysis, and social interaction. We focus on developing the skills involved in listening, speaking, reading, writing, viewing, and presenting in a variety of contexts, to develop critical, creative, and personal approaches to studying and analyzing literary and non-literary texts, engaging with texts from different historical periods and a variety of cultures, explore and analyzing aspects of personal, host, and other cultures through literary and non-literary texts, to explore language through a variety of media and modes, develop a lifelong interest in reading, which we all agree is very important, and to apply linguistic and literary concepts and skills in a variety of authentic contexts. So we have, as teachers, quite high expectations in terms of how we're structuring our units and how we're using texts within language and literature. So unlike a traditional kind of English literature course that maybe is what I was more familiar with growing up in Canada, here we're focusing not just on literary texts, but having an authentic balance of literary texts, looking at a variety of non-literary texts, and also showing that understanding in a variety of ways. So it's not as if every assessment in English is going to be an essay or a commentary, although these are very important skills for students to learn and focus on, but providing creative opportunities for students to show their understanding in authentic contexts. Within our subject, there are specific related concepts, and these really are the core discipline, core aspects of the discipline which we teach. And as we map out our curriculum, and when you have access to the curriculum guides, you'll see for English that we teach predominantly 3 per unit. So in one grade, we may teach a short story unit and a novel unit, and the learning experiences will be completely different based on the particular related concepts that we're focusing on. So for example, when we study the novel Fahrenheit 451 in grade 10, students are focusing quite a bit on genre, how this is a dystopian piece of fiction and what's unique about that, themes, how what Bradbury was suggesting about the direction of society is addressed, and maybe looking specifically at style, where in another context we may be focusing solely on character and context and setting. So each unit, we have these clearly identified related concepts. This is communicated to students, and it really drives the inquiry within each unit. We also have to prioritize them. So for example, over the 5 years, students will only study intertextuality twice, whereas something like style or theme, we study 2 or 3 times a year based on the text that we're looking at. Throughout the 5 years of MYP, students will complete 24 units of inquiry, and within those 24 units of inquiry, will complete 30 summative assessments. And what our goal has been in the English department is to really have fewer but very purposeful assessments. And we're fortunate that the way the criteria for evaluation works in English is that it's easy and almost challenging not to address several assessment criteria with each assessment. So when a student completes an assessment, they're either focusing on something that's going to be analytical, in which case the assessment criteria is A, analysis, and I'll show you what these mean a bit more in just a moment, organization or language. And if they're not doing something analytical like writing a commentary or writing an essay, they're doing more of a creative task, in which case they're being evaluated on producing text. And this can vary from making a documentary, writing a political speech, creating a comic, writing a monologue, and again being evaluated on organization and language. There's a few exceptions to these. Based on some creative assessments, we found it wasn't necessary to include organization because we weren't explicitly teaching that skill to students, but predominantly it's either going to be A or C. In the earlier grades, in grades 6 and 7, we may have more targeted assessments where it's not necessary to evaluate all three, but by including that with assessments, it allows us to have fewer assessments throughout the year. So every year in English, students have a total of 6 assessments, except for grade 6 and grade 9, where there's also an IDU. So by grouping them this way, it really makes for authentic learning experiences and meaningful summative assessments. Each criterion is broken down in particular strands. And these strands are very important because it's the means through which we are communicating to students exactly how we're evaluating the quality of their work. And I think at times students can be disheartened if they feel like they've produced something that's of very good quality, and us as either a parent or a teacher may say, yeah, objectively this is a good piece of work, but what becomes very important is how well what they're producing aligns with these particular strands. So within analysis, focusing on how well you're actually analyzing what is identified as being prioritized in the summative assessment, and that will often vary based on the related concept. So if we're looking at theme and character, students should be prioritizing analyzing that. If we're focusing on genre, students should prioritize analyzing genre. To comment on effects, to use evidence to justify their opinions, these three are pretty consistent with any analysis task. And then twice a year, students will also have to evaluate similarities and differences in a text. Now, when it's a creative assessment, students are evaluated on how well they produce text demonstrating insight, imagination, and sensitivity, while exploring and reflecting critically on new perspectives. And instead of evaluating the choices an author makes, being able to be very purposeful in the stylistic or linguistic choices that they make as producers of a text. And then being able to focus on relevant details and examples. In terms of organization, the language here is rather broad so that it can be quite malleable to different types of organizational structures, but following a structure that serves the context and intention. For analysis, analytical tasks, it's very important for commentary writing or essay writing that they're learning and developing these skills. For success throughout the MYP, success in the DP and beyond. And if there's one thing I can say from speaking and staying in contact with a lot of students who have graduated, after Raha, when they begin their tertiary education, students often feel very, very confident in how well they know how to organize and structure their work, especially something that they'd say sometimes compared to their peers. Organizing opinions and ideas in a coherent and logical manner, and then also using appropriate referencing tools based on the presentation style. So this is applicable to a persuasive presentation in which students are using maybe images. It's relevant to a documentary that they're including their sources, for example. And then focusing on language, students can use a varied vocabulary and sentence structures and forms of expression to be able to write in a register and style that serve the context and intention. So in an essay or formal writing, being able to use an extended vocabulary, being able to speak, to write quite academically and in formal language, and then in different, more creative contexts, how that might perhaps vary. If they're writing a poem, it wouldn't be appropriate for them to use more academic vocabulary, perhaps. And something that I think that we do quite well is for every single summative assessment task, we'll give students a task sheet My colleagues teaching grade 6 and 7 remarked to me today that they probably spent 50 minutes to an hour just going over what those expectations are, and every strand is specifically identified what you need to do in this assessment. Because that language is rather vague and broad to be applicable to a variety of assessments, we signal quite directly, you need to do this in order to satisfy this criteria. And so over the 5 years of MYP, we've tried to create units that really balance the types of assessments that students do. So for example, in grade 9, students will write 2 commentaries. They'll have 2 creative tasks, creating a comic, creating a poem. They'll deliver a human rights presentation, and they'll create an audio-visual essay. And this is to provide a balanced learning experience in terms of the related concepts that we're focusing on and the types of assessments. In terms of parent support, I think a few things that are quite important: being able to have conversations with your children about the expectations of assessment tasks, asking them to clarify to you, okay, so this is what you're working on in English, what exactly is it that you have to do, to ensure that they have clear targets of what they need to do to be successful, to help them set reasonable goals and to celebrate their accomplishments. We think it's important in English for students to focus on their strengths and their areas for development, and to set goals that are achievable. If a student struggles with their organization, their goal shouldn't be, hey, on the next assessment, I'm going to get a perfect score with organization. It should be, what's kind of the next steps for me in order to make that gradual progress. I also would stress that it's important to celebrate students' accomplishments, to focus on what their starting point is, and even if they don't get a perfect score on something, to celebrate the progress that they are making. To help students with time management, I've sat down with students in different capacities and focus on making a study schedule that prioritizes time, but that also prioritizes time not to be focusing on academics. And lastly, to encourage them to read for pleasure, because sometimes what we need to do in language and literature, we can enjoy a book for a little initially, but we really need to break it down to its component parts, and sometimes that becomes arduous for students. So giving them the chance and encouraging them to read for pleasure outside of class, I think is very important. We have an OSRA initiative for grades 6 through 8 where students can read any novel on their own and then create some type of a creative product for points. We also have a program that we use at the school called Read Theory. And Read Theory is a free software where students create a profile, and then they have brief reading tasks with multiple choice responses. And it develops analytical skills. Even for me teaching diploma program, I often recommend students who maybe struggle with analysis to use this platform. It also provides Lexile scores. So based on a student's reading ability, it provides them a score which is then aligned with the text we have in our library. So it's an easy way for students to know, okay, this is kind of where my reading level is, and it doesn't say like grade 8 or grade 9, it's just a generic number. I can go to the library and try to find a book that's at that appropriate score. So they're reading texts and novels that are not only enjoyable and interesting, but challenging for them, just to develop their vocabulary and English abilities. That's my presentation, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. Hi.
Because I see it in the HVAC in the calendar, but there were no details about it. Can you please tell us?
Yeah, sure. So Think Tac Toe is something we're promoting with grades 6, 7, and 8. We had it with all of MYP last year, but we felt that grade 9 and 10 didn't buy into it as much. Essentially, the students are asked to read anything that they want. And on the Tic Tac Toe board, there's a number of things that they can create. Nothing would take more than maybe 25 minutes. So I know students have a lot going on, but the motivation for this comes from the idea that they're contributing to their OSRA. And it would be something like write a poem about a character from a book, or create a calendar for what the action of the novel. So it's intended to be an extension activity for students and something that's fun and creative instead of seeming like a lot of extra work. Okay. All right.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Vaughn.
Hello, I'm Amanda, I'm head of science. I have some handouts that might be useful for you, so, and I'll refer to them in my presentation.
It's just it's not something that you do in class, it's more like an extension activity. It doesn't really align with the inquiry, so like
Okay. Can I just see by a show of hands who has students in grade 6? Oh, sorry, children. Okay, and 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, all right, so got a good cross section. Sorry, I've got a bit of a cold, so I'm holding a tissue, my nose is running. I'm not going to talk through all the details on the slide. I'll probably fill in some gaps, so feel free if you wanted to take a photo of the slides, or Vaughan, are you making our slides available? We're being filmed. Okay, great. So you can refer back to this information later if you don't catch everything on the slide. So I guess what I want to say about our curriculum, if you're new to the IB, is that we have taken great care to backwards plan our curriculum from the DP. So the 3 programs essentially work together. If you had children in the PYP and they're entering the MYP, that's a great start. But there's no reasons why students can't enter from other programs into the MYP or from other programs into the DP. But we're very careful to make sure that we have exposed students to the content by the time they enter the DP. So that's called backwards planning. And I guess that the biggest feature of MYP in the IB is the inquiry-based, concept-driven program. So we do a lot of hands-on work in science, and one feature that I'll talk about that they don't get in other subjects, of course, is our lab report, which has the experiment built into the middle. So that's something that's unique to our science subject. But there's a lot of crossover with skills in other subjects, testing skills, essay-based skills, those sorts of things. And this is where it gets tricky because we are a practical and a theoretical subject. So sometimes you might find that your child is in a unit that they're designing an experiment, then they're doing the experiment, and then they're reporting on the experiment, and that could take all of 6 weeks. It's quite involved. Obviously some Emiratis in the audience, and we actually at this school we have global context statements built into our units, and they often have a local or UAE context, or we look at global issues. So for instance in grade 6, towards the end of the year, we're doing a unit on ecosystems, and we're particularly interested in looking at water use in ecosystems, and also the process of desalination that we use here for our freshwater access. So that's always kept in mind when we're designing units. There are some key skills in science. I had an interesting parent email the other day, a nervous grade 6 parent wondering if their child was going to get penalized for spelling mistakes. We don't actually penalize students for spelling mistakes in our rubric in grade 6. There's no language strand that suggests that spelling is important. But we do focus on terminology, topic-specific terminology and their use. But if I am marking a grade 6 test, as I am at the moment, and I can understand the word that they're trying to use, they don't have any penalty for that. They have to use objective language. This is a very big change for them because they're very creative in the younger middle years, and there's a lot of I this and I feel. So the key skill of writing in the third person, impersonal manner is a feature of our subject. Of course, they have to be able to use the language of science, which is mathematics, and we teach skills of graphing and analysis of graphs. And they need to be scientifically literate, so they need to be able to communicate ideas, read ideas, analyze ideas that are happening in the world. So, what is the progression of science-specific skills and how do they demonstrate their knowledge? Well, your handout is really the key to that in science. We, in our department, use a vertical rubric, which you all have a copy of, and I've color-coded them. So you can see that there's a rhythm. The A's are blue, the B's are green, the C is yellow, and the D is orange. And the progression of skills is basically as you go down the column, what we call the strand, as you go down the column, maybe I'll demonstrate this. Here we are. A is blue, B is green, C is yellow, D is orange. As you go down, you'll see that the command term in bold gets progressively more difficult. And this changes from MYP 1, which is grade 6. There's a big jump into grade 7. They sit on that rubric for 2 years in grade 8, 7 and 8. Then there's another jump in grade 9, and then they sit on that rubric for 9 and 10. And basically, the rubric is the same, we're just expecting more depth from their answers. And the key to that depth is the command terms. And the command terms, students, we go through this with students, but you have a page of the command terms at the back. I see some of my parents from last time that really enjoyed the color-coded rubrics, so you'll have a copy. And if I just go back to these, you'll start to see another rhythm in our course, which is A. If you're a grade 6 parent, your children have just done an A. That is the blue rubric. There's 3 strands. They have to outline their knowledge, they have to solve problems, and they have to interpret information to make judgments. Yeah? The green and the yellow is together, that's our experiment. They will do a B and a C very frequently in our subject because it's specific to our subject. That is design an experiment with all these components. In the middle they do the experiment, and then this is evaluate their experiment in the yellow. And then the last criteria is really how the IB mindset is, which is that science is not a study that is separate to the real world. And many of your children may be going into careers where they have to work with scientists, or they want to work in a science field, and they have to be able to apply this knowledge to real life situations, and also work on how or understand and analyze science's impact on the world. So this criterion D reflects that. It's called Reflecting on the Impacts of Science. It's generally an essay or a research project. It could be a poster, it could be some a study like a survey, and this is where we look at the intersection of science with questions of moral, ethical, cultural, social, political, economic, and environmental issues. Yeah. These come back again and again. Like I say, if your child is transitioning from 6 to 7, all that's happened is the top tier has just got one step harder. If they're transitioning from grade 8 to grade 9, all that's happened is the top band has just got one step harder. Does that make it easier for you?
What happened to your students who just entered?
What I'm doing with you, we do in our lessons. We Actually, in grade 6, we looked at this rubric. It's in the back of their notebook in blue, green, orange, and yellow.
They entered like in grade 9. But
Right.
They didn't have all this previous knowledge.
Right. The teacher will go through every first assessment. They'll make sure that they understand the task and how it's being graded. And in our subject too, there's a reflection on the grade, because I'm sure, as Juan has told you, there's 2 cycles per year. So they do ABCD once, semester 1, ABCD twice, semester 2. So they get 2 chances at it. And in the meantime, they reflect on which strand they did well in, which strand they were weaker in, and how they're going to move up. That is in class. That's part of our work with students to help them understand how they're graded and how to improve their grade. Okay.
We have the assessment presentation in 2 weeks' time, so some
Right.
of what you are hearing today, that could be a warm-up to the one that's coming up.
Okay. All right. So inherent in the criteria, I mentioned the command terms. We use a vertical rubric. So the top of the column in grey indicates where are we taking those marks from. Other subjects use a horizontal rubric and they have task sheets. But I think it's easier for our students when we create templates. The lab report headings are at the top of our rubric. So they know exactly where their grades are being taken from. We scaffold the skills in lessons. I keep using this word template. That means that we will supply an outline for an essay, or maybe an outline for a lab report, and they can fill in the details. The ATL skills, the approaches to learning skills, are super important. There's some attached to each unit. So at the moment in grade 6, they're new to the school, so our focus is on organisation and social skills. How do we work together in the classroom? Yeah, and the criterion is developed through the rubric, like I said. Every jump from year 1 to 3, slightly harder, from 3 to 5, slightly harder again. Okay. So, if you are a parent of a child in grade 9 and 10, we have just changed a little bit about how we structure that course. It's called a carousel, and your children will move through different specialty teachers. So if your child is in grade 9 at the moment, they're already in a unit that's focused on a discipline such as biology. And then after 6 weeks, they will move on to chemistry or physics, and they will have a new teacher who is actually a DP specialist in that topic. That's a new change for grade 9. Grade 10, it's a carousel, but they also move through the teachers like they used to last year. One of the things that I'll be talking at an information session on subject selection for DP is, in order to qualify to get into a higher level DP subject in science, they need to get a 5 across those 3 units in biology, chemistry, and physics in grade 10. So even though they're separated into the subject disciplines, the end of year mark is what qualifies them to get into a higher level subject. I'll be going over that in an information session on choices for the DP on the 11th of October. And I think we've mentioned that. So, I guess you're here because you want to know, how do you assist your child at home perform well in this subject? I don't think organisation can be underplayed, especially in the lower middle years. There's a lot going on. And if I look at the DP students that I teach, one thing that stands out is that they can organise everything that they need to do and keep on top of what is a quite challenging workload. Also at home, creating a quiet space in which they can do some focused study and a regular time. What I noticed, especially with the younger middle school students, is that they can't sit still for too long. So practice at a regular time every day is a good idea. the research on technology is, to boil it down, too much is bad for your levels of concentration.